Hey everyone, it's May, and welcome to another episode of the May Lee Show. I know that I haven't been putting out episodes every week for a little while, and this is my time to explain why and what's going on. I've been feeling pretty depleted lately, physically, spiritually, mentally. And I know that all of you can relate because we've been going through all of this COVID and anti Asian hate and, the uncertainty for so long now. But for me, I do feel like I have so many plates that are spinning in the air at the same time. I do this podcast. I'm continuing my activism work, and which entails, combing through news and getting different messages from people and trying to figure out what's going on and absorbing a lot of that sort of frustration and fear and sort of the violent stories that we continue hearing about when it comes to anti-Asian hate. And I post on social media on a very regular basis. I'm also an adjunct professor at USC, and we're just finishing off our summer session for the graduate program, which is a slog. So that's been pretty exhausting. So I do feel as if I am drained in many ways. But I also know there's a level of frustration that I've been feeling. And that frustration, part of it is coming from my ego. And let me explain. And I actually posted something about this on Instagram yesterday, and a lot of you have responded and reacted in a very powerful way. So obviously it resonated. So let me explain. So when I talk about ego, I mean that oftentimes get trapped into the idea that it has to be about me and why am I not getting the attention and the glory? Why am I not being elevated in a bigger way? Why am I seeing other people doing things that are similar, and yet they kind of jumped in later in the game, and when they knew it was safer to talk about these things about racism and anti-Asian hate, and yet I'm not being included in the conversation oftentimes. Again, I'm going to keep on saying this. It's all about my ego, and it's about sort of power and wanting more power and wanting my ego to be inflated and sort of coddled. And I went on a walk yesterday, and I was listening to Oprah, who I love because she's such a wise person. And I was listening to her podcast called Super Soul. And there was this one segment within that podcast where she talked about something called authentic power. And it just struck me like lightning. It was as if it was the message that I needed to hear in that moment. So I'm going to read part of it because I had to come home and write it down because it was so powerful. She said, "When I think of authentic power, I think of the power that occurs when purpose aligns with personality to serve the greater good. For me, the only real power is the kind that comes from the core of who you are and reflects all that you are meant to be. When you see this kind of power shining through someone in all its truth and certainty, it is irresistible, inspiring, elevating. The secret is alignment. When you know for sure that you're on course and you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, fulfilling your soul's intention, our heart's desire, when your life is on course with its purpose, you are at your most powerful. And though you may stumble, you will not fall." That just hit me so, so hard and in the most powerful way because that is exactly what I needed to hear. Because my struggle was about my ego, was about wanting my own power and the glory for myself, and that struggle of purpose versus selfishness and the power that comes with either wanting it for yourself or authentic power, which is about being true to your soul, your purpose, and the alignment of that. And so I was like, my God, Oprah, you are seriously an amazing person because you literally spoke to me the moment I needed it. And of course, I think that was divine as well. That God, sent this message to me through Oprah's podcast. So I really was reminded that the work that I'm doing that I know is so purposeful, that I was given this purpose to live out. And it comes from so deep within my soul that it's not about me. It's about the mission. It's about the movement, and it's about serving for the greater good. So I know that I will stumble, and I definitely continue to stumble, but I know that I won't fall as long as I keep that in my head, my heart, my soul, that authentic power. I don't want to get distracted by other people, um, people who may come and go. I don't want to get distracted with the idea of not being part of this in crowd. And even within the AAPI community, I sometimes feel like an outsider and that I'm not being included in certain things. But I have to stay with the mission, I have to stay the course. I can't get distracted by that because those things fade. What will last is the work that we do. And will that matter? Will that make a difference? And that's what I need to focus on. So thank you, Oprah. God, I love you so much. It's just ridiculous. I mean, it's like, I want to be her best friend, but she already has a best friend, Gail King. Anyway, so now let's move on to the episode for today. I was able to interview recently Marisa Hamamoto, and she is a phenomenal young woman. She has been named one of 13 People Magazine's Women Changing the World 2021. She also was InStyle Magazine Badass 50 2021. Marisa Hamamoto has a very fascinating story. She's actually a stroke survivor who lives with PTSD, but she's a dancer who decided to sort of blaze her own trail. She is an Asian American woman who realized that even the world of dancing, it was kind of conventional, and if you didn't fit in the box, it didn't work, right? They would constantly tell her you're not right, and so she decided to blaze her own trail and found that combining dance with disability was an amazingly unique combination. And so she decided to start this dance company called Infinite Flow. But I had a chance to sit down with her, well, virtually, of course, and talk to her about her past, her trauma, and how that shaped her into the woman that she is today. So here's that interview. Hi, Marisa. Welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
Thank you so much, May, for having me. You're like a big sister to me. Like, I've been listening to your podcast, following you on social. Like, I've followed your journey here and there on CNN. And,
Oh,
representation is just so important. So it's just so nice to see someone that kind of looks like you that's doing like badass stuff. So,
well, from
yes.
one badass sister to another, thank you so much. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show, because I always like talking to people who care about representation. And I know that you've been on this journey too, of kind of connecting more and more with your Asian identity. And then, but also doing the work that you've been doing through dance. And that's all obviously what we're going to talk about. So let's start kind of from the beginning of your journey, because I know that, having read some materials and looking at some videos from your past, that you always did want to be a dancer, right? Since you were a kid.
Yes, I'm going to connect much of my story to my Asian American identity. It's actually only recently that I've been really kind of putting my Asian American identity front and center as I tell my story. But in regards to dance, so I grew up in Irvine, California during the 80s and 90s. At elementary school, like I always felt like the other. I always felt like I didn't
Yeah.
belong. On the other hand, after school ballet classes, I was still the only girl of color
Mm-hmm.
in these dance
Yep.
classes. However, something about moving my body to music with the other girls made me feel like I belonged.
Mm.
And just between the love of moving my body to music and then just kind of falling in love, I think I saw a performance of New York City Ballet when I was 12. And between that, I just was like, oh my gosh, I want to be a dancer,
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
However, I would say just like probably any other, probably 95% of Asian families, dance was a hobby. It wasn't never considered something that you do
Right.
professionally.
It's
So
not a
definitely
career,
fought
right?
through.
Within the traditional Asian sort of, definition, it's not a career.
No, it's not. It's not. And even like in Japan, like, I went to university and grad school and lived a couple years. I spent most of my 20s in Japan. And, Japan's dance culture is huge. However, when it comes to dance as a profession, they're very far behind
Yeah.
because it's like this cultural mindset of like dance being there's a word called okeko in Japanese, and it just means lessons. And so dance is considered like this thing that you learn, and it's part of culture,
Yeah.
but it's not necessarily your profession.
Right. It's
So
like taking an art class so you can familiarize yourself with things, but it's not a profession. Well, let's go back to when you found dance and you said that it kind of made you feel like you can express yourself in a different way. But again, you were really the only a person of color in your ballet class. I mean, I identify with that when I saw you say that, or I think I read it in an article. Same with me. I took ballet when I was a kid, and I loved it, but I was definitely the only kid, a minority kid in the class. And I recall one time the ballet teacher, she was this old white woman, and she said to me and my mother that she didn't want me to lead so much and be too good because I stuck out. So she really nailed me down and completely made me feel deflated because she didn't like
mm,
the fact that this Asian girl was dancing better than the others. And so
mm,
that was a really interesting. I have that memory that I think I was about 7 years old as well at the time.
wow.
Yeah, and I still remember that so clearly and how it made me feel.
Yeah, it's very it's such a I do have experiences where, because I was a little darker than everyone, I was put at the end of the line.
Right.
Um like I it's now there's a little bit of finally Asians, especially in the performing arts sector of dance, are speaking out about some of the racism that exists in the dance world. But what's interesting about what's really ironic is dance at its essence belongs to everyone.
Yeah.
I have a tagline that says dance doesn't discriminate. Dance is a universal language. And I mean, dance is used to treat Parkinson's disease, and it's proven that it reduces the risk of dementia, and it's existed since prehistoric times. So dance is something that is part of just humanity, period.
Right.
It's part of
Right.
our DNA. However, the dance industry is very uninclusive, and
Yeah.
it's a microcosm of the rest of the world. So just like there's racism and ableism and sexism and all these isms in the rest of the world, that also exists in the dance world,
Right.
unfortunately.
Right, right. So
Mhm.
then, even with all of these, barriers that you did see, but you obviously loved it enough to continue doing it, right? So you wanted to pursue dance as a profession, not just a hobby. But then let's cut to when you had your spinal cord, or you had a stroke, right? And you were paralyzed for a
Yeah,
bit.
let me kind of build up to that moment.
Yeah.
So in my late teens, I was sexually assaulted by a ballet teacher.
Right.
And this really, really tore me apart. This teacher not only didn't believe in me, he also compared my body to others. And all of this just added to feeling like I didn't matter, I didn't belong. And, again, um, my family never talked about love or sex. I didn't know
Mm,
how to respond to this
right.
at all. I didn't, I didn't know what a mental illness was. I didn't know what trauma was. And so
Did you
not only did this,
internalize all of this? You kept it to
I
yourself.
kept silent. I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't have friends to talk to about this.
Yeah.
It was all just, it happened, and happened multiple times, not just once, multiple
Mm,
times. I just did not know how to cope with it. So already I had like, this huge hole in my heart from this whole incident. Long story short, I gave up on ballet. Ballet was just not happening, career wise. And so I gave up, I quit dancing up. at one point. I think it was like 20 or something. And then 21, I decided to go to college in Japan. I kind of needed transition out of this country, but also, like, as a joke, my mom was like, well, why don't you just go to school in Japan? It's your opportunity to experience your culture.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, why not? I'm bilingual. I'm Japanese from my mom's side, fourth generation Japanese American from my father's side. So I'm bilingual. And I'm
Yep.
like, you know what? This is my opportunity to go. So I went to Japan. And what's crazy, and sorry, I'm going to digress a little bit, but here in America, it's like I'm not American enough,
Yeah.
like never American enough.
Right.
In Japan, I'm not Japanese enough,
Yep. Yep.
like, and so I was like going, shoot, I'm among all these people that look like me. I speak the language fluently, no accents, but I don't feel like I belong here too. So it was definitely this really I was like, okay, I guess I don't belong anywhere. It was kind of like this thing, but it was hurtful. Again, you take these things personally. So what I turned to in Japan was, again, dance. Dance
Mm.
became like my place to kind of feel grounded. Like,
Yep.
it's a language I know, it's a language I'm familiar with. It is a universal language. And
Yep.
so once again, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm still young enough to pursue a professional dance career. Let's go for it. So July 26, 2006, in the middle of a contemporary dance class after school, I was dancing really well. And then suddenly I felt my elbows tingle. And momentarily I fell to the ground. I felt my whole body numb, lost sensation, and I found myself paralyzed from the neck down.
God.
And just fast forwarding, the next day I was diagnosed with a spinal cord infarction, which is also known as a stroke in the spinal cord, and was told by the doctor that I may never be able to walk or dance again. And honestly, May, that night I actually had, oh, I had this, oh God, I'm going to tear up talking about this, but I honestly thought I was going to die that night. There was also a lot of shame. This is like weird to admit, but I'm going to, I think there was a lot of shame around, like, it's like, it was almost like, what did I do wrong was
Mm.
kind of what was going through me.
So you were
And
almost blaming yourself.
I was blaming myself.
Yeah.
And part of it was also like, I look at my life prior to um, this stroke happening. And I will fully admit, I was not eating properly. I was not sleeping properly. I was overworking. I was a super perfectionist when it comes to the academics and the dance. I was working part time. I mean, I was doing a lot.
Yeah.
And I was definitely not taking care of myself.
Yeah, we certainly know that stress can do devastating things to you physically and mentally, in all ways. So that wouldn't surprise me if that was part of it. But so how long were you actually paralyzed before everything came back? The movement came back.
Yeah, that's, to this day, my left hand is slightly paralyzed. I have a left side that's still, kind of numb. And so, how I like to say this is that I did walk out of the hospital 2 months later,
Mm.
and never did I think that this whole stroke became my life, led to my life purpose at that time.
Right.
However, uh, even though I was able to walk out of the hospital, oftentimes when I speak on stage, I say that I was still paralyzed on the inside.
Hmm.
So the stroke had really triggered, like, a lot of trauma from the past, whether it was anti-Asian discrimination, the stroke itself, the body shaming, the rejection,
Right.
not feeling like I belong, like the stroke. And again, you have to understand, I was in the hospital 2006, no iPhones, no headsets, nothing, like, I in silence for 2 months. And during that time, it was just this battle of I was battling all this trauma from the past. And so even though I walked out of the hospital, I dealt with massive PTSD afterward.
Let's cut to then, you know, you would mention because of your stroke and because of the paralysis, that sort of set you on a new course that you didn't even realize that you were going to be heading down, which was to try to combine your love of dance with the idea of giving people with disabilities the opportunity to take part in dance and discover the way they can move even with their disability. So tell me that sort of metamorphosis. How did that all happen?
2012, I moved to Los Angeles. I moved back home in Orange County for a moment, and then moved to LA, and with a fresh start for a dance career. I was just high hopes and dreams. I'm like, all right, um, I'm gonna make this happen. And so here in LA, here I am. But I was facing the same things all over. Um, Discrimination against Asian Americans. So, for example, I was told on multiple occasions that Asians didn't fit the role of a ballroom or salsa dancer.
Hmm.
Um, all this typecasting was just such a headache. I didn't want to even deal with it anymore. Body shaming, body shaming, toxic work culture. I was experiencing the exact same things
Right.
I was prior to the stroke. And I'm like, I knew that I was going to be a dancer, but it wasn't going to be the typical dancer. I was
Right.
going to do something extraordinary with dance, and I didn't know what this was. But long story short, like, I was like, I don't know why, but I feel destined to do something in this field of dance and disability. I saw a vision of a world class dance company that had dancers with and without disabilities. And then one thing led to the next. And along this journey, I met a Filipino paraplegic bodybuilder named Adelpho that lived 30 miles away from me in Long Beach, California. And and I hit him up on social media saying, "Hey, are you interested in dancing?" And he had zero dance background, but he said, "Sure, I'll try it out." And
Wait, can I
so
ask
we,
you a question about that? Because he's a bodybuilder in a wheelchair. And
yep.
what made you think that a bodybuilder in a wheelchair would want to dance?
Basically, I was trying to figure out where to start.
Okay.
It's like I mean, as you know from starting a podcast and many other projects, sometimes getting started is the hardest thing. So in my case, I had this. I was like, oh my gosh, it's my destiny to provide equal access to dance to people with disabilities. This was kind of like my aha moment. Yeah, I didn't know where to start.
Mm.
But then as a ballroom dancer, I was like, maybe I should just get myself a wheelchair, well, at that time, a wheelchair dance partner. Um, but I looked around as in like, went on Instagram and Facebook and whatnot, and I couldn't find any wheelchair dancers. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll look in the acting community and the athletic community. And that was when I
Ah.
found Bo, and I was like, well, he likes to flex, he likes to show off, a good looking dude. Why not? He
and
only
then
lives 30
a- and
miles
then he
away.
was open to it. He was actually
It was,
open to it. Yeah.
he and I are like brother and sister. We are still dancing to this day.
Is he
And
the
he
one that
was just,
you're dancing with in one of your videos on stage?
yeah, I have two wheelchair dance partners, Peter and Adelpho.
Okay.
Adelpho's the one with long black hair.
Is
He's
that the
Filipino.
Okay, but is that the video where I think you're dancing to Rise Up?
Yes, yes, correct. Yeah.
Ah, that is a beautiful performance.
Thank you. And that the message behind the piece too is very much like his story is he was in a car accident when he was 22 years old. Had to rise up from his own paralysis, and same thing with me. We've all had to rise up both emotionally and physically in our own way, and so that piece definitely says a lot about that message. Going back to Delpho, so we met and in the studio, and honestly, I was initially terrified to dance with Adelpho. Um, I had never danced with someone with a disability. I didn't know what I was doing, but and actually he had no idea what he was doing either. He didn't even know how to count music. But after a couple hours of dancing with him, there was this magical moment where I realized that dancing with Adelpha was nothing different from dancing with anyone else.
Mm.
And I was like, oh my, it was such a breakthrough moment where I was like, oh my gosh, if the world danced, there would be no war, was kind of how far my brain went that night. And I was like, okay, I got to take action. And fast forwarding, that eventually became Infinite Flow.
Right.
And Infinite Flow has evolved since 2015 very much. Today, I mean, I've rewritten the mission statement like 10 times. And so for any entrepreneurs out there, yes, your mission is going to evolve as you better understand the problems that you're solving here. But, basically Infinite Flow is a professional dance company that employs dancers with and without disabilities, with a mission to promote inclusion and dismantle biases. And though we started off as a wheelchair dance company, on my roster, I have wheelchair users, amputees, deaf, blind, neurodivergent, those with invisible disabilities,
Right.
And so it's a very diverse, group. And we really take an intersectional approach to disability inclusion, meaning that not only are we putting disability inclusion first, we're also kind of making sure that those that are historically marginalized, whether it's people of color, LGBTQ, refugees, et cetera, are kind of front and center of what we
Yeah.
do.
Well, so I mean, I think it's an amazing project, and obviously you're doing quite well because you've gotten the recognition from different publications, and you've performed in front of vast audiences, including huge corporations like Apple and Facebook, and you name it. So clearly, it's successful in terms of the mission of inclusion, right? And showing that you're taking the disabled out of the disability part, right? You're saying that these are able-bodied people. Just look at them in a different way and give them an opportunity to be able to perform, with what they have. So tell me how it has evolved in terms of, have you been able to change people's minds? I mean, do you see like people all of a sudden going, wow, I didn't even think this was possible? Even the people who are participating, I bet they probably go through a transformation themselves.
Yeah, and I would say the transformation goes equally across those with and without disabilities.
Mm.
And my for me, I called our company Infinite Flow, and again, it's not like it was really well thought out, but I wanted to use the word infinity or infinite in there because for me, the infinity sign represents two people dancing as one. And I want to say two very different people dancing as one. It's a symbol of inclusion. So my priority always is to show what we can do together. We're not a dance company where we put the person with a disability on a pedestal. It's more like what beauty can exist when we work together.
Hmm.
A lot of our impact, it's not like we can immediately see, but one place that we feel it like so raw is our elementary school assemblies. I have to say, we love performing in front of kids because kids respond to our work like that,
Right.
and we
Right.
know that um, what is experienced as a child can possibly stay with that child forever.
For sure.
We've passed out surveys before and after assemblies. What are the first three words that come to mind when you think about disability? And before we get words like gross, bad, sad,
Mm.
um, they need help, don't want to talk to them. It's oftentimes very negative or very like, oh, I feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
Afterward, like whether it's our in-person assembly or we actually ended up taking our in-person into a virtual program called Scoops of Inclusion, but whether it's our in-person or virtual, afterward we get words like friend, like, dance, fun,
Wow.
like
And it's that immediate, the impact. Isn't that
45
amazing?
minutes. 45 minutes.
Yeah.
I think one reason why I wanted to come onto your show is that I do feel that we need to dismantle ableism in the AAPI community as well. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the intersection between being Asian American, Pacific Islander, and having a disability is something that I'm not seeing enough journalism about. I'm not seeing enough conversations about. Yeah, I do know that, again, 1 in 4 Americans, 20 to 25% of Americans have a disability. And so that's the same thing within the Asian American community. And I think it's a topic that we need to talk about more. And especially with, what here, I mean, I'll give you one instance. Here in Los Angeles, there is a organization, it's I can't remember the exact name, but it's a Japanese Parents Association for children with disabilities, and it's an organization that serves parents, Japanese speaking parents with children with disabilities, and providing resources. But when I encountered this organization, I was reminded about how much, these are Japanese parents that don't speak great English, and so in order to get the information they need or the resources they need for their children with disabilities, there needed to be a gap. There's a gap in language that needed to be filled. So this organization has stepped out to do that. But I do feel like there is, as we went through this, as we are going through the Stop Asian Hate movement, I would like to see more conversations around, Asians with disabilities and a lot of the challenges that are involved in that.
Well, I think when it comes to inclusion, if we all really believe completely in the idea of inclusion, it means inclusion of everyone, right? It doesn't just mean about race and ethnicity. It has to be about things like disabled, disabilities. It has to be about all of these other categories that historically of people who have been left out, who've been marginalized, who have been made to feel like the other, the outsider. And that could be, yes, race, but it could definitely mean disability and, physical limitations, all of that. So I think that's a very important point to make, Marissa, because within the Asian community, as we all know, there is still a level of maybe intolerance or shame involved when it comes to things like physical disabilities, mental health, right? We mentioned that before, that's considered taboo to talk about mental health. Now, my father was a psychiatrist, so I was brought up with the idea that mental health was an issue that needed to be addressed, but I'm an anomaly, right? So things like this, you're very right in terms of the AAPI community needing to be much more open-minded and embracing this concept of, really opening up to this idea and not being shameful about it.
One thing I want to note that was a significant impact for me was when we think about disability, we think about a medical condition, an impairment. However, the WHO, the World Health Organization, redefined disability in 2011 as a mismatch between a person's body and their environment. So what that means, like, for example, a simple example, let's say a wheelchair user wants to go to the second floor of a building that doesn't have an elevator. It's not the wheelchair user that is disabled in this case. It's the building without the elevator that's disabling the situation. So same thing with captioning. An uncaptioned video that has dialogue, it's not the deaf person that's disabled in this case. It's the uncaptioned video that's disabling the situation.
Right.
So, it's like, how can we fill in, how can we make a world where we have less mismatches? And from this definition, what I realized was that for this whole time, I was trying to fit myself into a box of a dancer. Like there was a mismatch between my body and the dance world. And for a long time, I was trying to fit inside of a box that I could not fit in. But now it's like I realized that I didn't have to fit into that box anymore, that I can create a world where I do belong, And so I think it goes both ways, in which we need to continue to create environments that welcomes everyone, but also when the systems are just not working, acknowledge it and dismantle it,
Right.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you have to create what isn't there sometimes, that works
Hmm.
better for you
Exactly.
and those around you. And so I'm all about that. I'm all about like dismantling the box and not trying to shove a square peg into a round hole, which is what
Yes, I know.
so many people in this world do all the time. You're trying to literally shove a round peg into a square hole and you know it's not going to work, but you keep doing it because you think that's the only option. Well, that it
Yeah,
isn't the only option.
I've heard you use the analogy a few times, and I love it.
Marissa, it was so good to meet you and chat with you and discuss these very important issues that oftentimes are go largely ignored. So thank you for continuing to talk about these important subjects. So good luck to you.
Yes, thank you so much, May, for allowing me to just, speak openly today. And I will continue to listen to your wonderful podcast episodes. So
Well,
thank
thank
you.
you. All right. All right. We'll be in touch again soon. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode and that conversation with Marissa. And just, the lesson, of course, is that you can do whatever you want. Um, don't consider yourself disabled either physically, mentally, spiritually. If you have the strength and if you have the desire, create your own future, blaze your own path, and don't let anyone say you can't. That should actually inspire you to say, well, yes, I can, and I'm going to do it. So, again, I hope you enjoy that episode. And like I said at the beginning of this episode, let's all try to find our authentic power. Let's not let distractions of the world guide us and deflate us and take away our spirit. You know what is in your soul, or if not, find it. Find it. Find that authentic power. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening or watching. And follow us on Instagram if you aren't already. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. I just started posting on TikTok. I'm kind of experimenting with that, so I'm not sure. And of course, Facebook as well. All right. Take care, everyone. See you soon.